Great, you're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the PathCheck Global Health Innovators Talk Series. We at PathCheck look towards digital solutions to solve the pandemic response and to handle future waves on it. I would like to invite you to visit our organization at pathcheck.org to know more about our efforts. Please feel free to join our Slack workspace, which is tiny.cc/pathcheck Slack. And for visiting and knowing about the previous research talks in the Global Health Innovators series, please visit tiny.cc PCF Research Talks. I would like to thank all my co-organizers in putting this together. I'm Rohan Sukumaran, Research Manager at the PathCheck Foundation, and I'd like to thank Professor Ramesh Raskar, Christian Glorioso, Tapate Sethi, Nina Vesic, and Mise Hudson for arranging the speakers and handling all the logistics of the talk. So thanks a lot, everyone. So the GHI Talk Series, or the Global Health Innovators Talk Series, is a bi-weekly research meetup conducted at PathCheck with the focus being on bringing speakers who are creating an impact on digital health with AI, software, and technology. And the main motivation behind this talk is to drive collaborations on computational health, or AI for health, with cross-disciplinary efforts from computer science, medicine, bioinformatics, and much more. With that, I would like to invite two of our speakers for today, Diana Stansbury and Dr. Peter J. Hotez, MD, PhD. Thanks to both of you for spending your precious time with us and coming over to talk at this event. And I'd like to invite Dr. Hudson to introduce the speakers. So we'd be going with Dr. Peter J. Hutz first.
Hi, sure. Thank you guys so much again for joining us. Dr. Peter Hotez is the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine and Professor of Pediatrics and Molecular Virology and Microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine, where he is also the co-director of the Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development and the Texas Children's Hospital Endowed Chair of Tropical Pediatrics. He is a professor at the University, a fellow in disease and poverty at the James A. Baker Institute, senior fellow at Scowcroft Institute of International Affairs. And his recent book is Preventing the Next Pandemic, Vaccine Diplomacy in the Time of Anti-Science, published by Johns Hopkins University Press. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Hotez.
Well, thanks so much for having me today. And it's an honor to be able to present briefly and answer some questions. In terms of our role in global health innovation for COVID-19, we've been involved in vaccine development. So I've devoted my life to being an MD, PhD vaccine scientist, developing vaccines for mostly parasitic infections that affect low and middle income countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We've developed new vaccines for diseases such as schistosomiasis and hookworm and Chagas disease, and these are in various stages of product and clinical development. Most people, of course, now over the last couple of years know me for our work on COVID, but that's actually more recent. What happened was about 10, 11 years ago, we had, of course, been developing vaccines for parasitic infections, and I was introduced by a colleague. We were collaborating on a river blindness vaccine for Africa, onchocerciasis. It's a parasitic worm infection. And my colleague, Sarah Lustigman, said, hey, we've got this really great team of virologists here at the New York Blood Center where Sarah worked, who were working on coronavirus vaccines. And at the time, we didn't know that much about coronaviruses, but they had been orphaned just like our parasitic disease vaccines were. So we began collaborating with them, wrote grants to the National Institutes of Health, and before we knew it, we had prototype vaccines for SARS and for MERS, and all of that work led to showing that the spike protein was a vulnerable target for coronaviruses. That was critically in showing how to deliver the spike protein to the immune system, how to induce virus neutralizing antibodies, and how all of that work really fed into the Operation Warp Speed program that started last year and ultimately was instrumental for the mRNA vaccines and the adenovirus vaccines. But what we had also decided, since we were developing SARS and MERS vaccines, low-cost vaccines that use a recombinant protein platform, we began doing the same for our COVID-19 vaccines as well. So when we had already had the SARS and MERS vaccines developed, prototype vaccines at different stages, and when we saw the SARS-2 coronavirus sequence, which Chinese scientists had put up on bioRxiv, a preprint server, in the middle of January, we looked at this and said, we got this. And when I say we, our Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development is jointly run by myself and Dr. Mary Elena Bottazzi, who's my science partners. We've worked together for the last 20 years. And, we had this terrific team of scientists that were able to pivot pretty quickly and develop a prototype COVID vaccine. And what was important there was the fact that we had worked out a lot of the bugs for coronavirus vaccines for our recombinant protein SARS vaccines. The first one showing that we need to remove the N-terminal amino acid because it's heavily glycosylated, and getting rid of any free cysteines that could form intermolecular disulfide bonds. And, if you're a biochemist or a molecular biologist, you might say those sound like trivial things, but it took time to work out, over the previous year so we could hit the ground running. And the urgency was, as good as the mRNA vaccines are, and I'm grateful. I got the 2 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine early on. They are still a new technology in terms of being able to scale it for the world, and that's why you're not seeing many low and middle income countries have access to either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine, because it takes time to learn. It becomes an engineering problem how to scale it up. The advantage of our vaccine is it uses a recombinant protein genetic engineering technology out of yeast that's been around for almost 40 years. So most of us have gotten the recombinant hepatitis B vaccine made by Merck and other companies, and that's involved in taking the hepatitis surface antigen and genetically engineering it into yeast. And that's the approach we've always been taking. And the nice thing about that technology is it's cheap. You can make lots of it. And second, there's no upper limit to scale up. You can make literally billions of doses of that. So that's one of the reasons why we use that yeast expression technology as one of our workhorses for all of our low-cost global health vaccines for parasitic diseases. And we've adopted that same approach. So we did this, and it looked really exciting for COVID-19. We were able to turn it around pretty quickly, scale it up, and produce it. And now we've licensed it to several organizations as a non-exclusive license to give them the opportunity to scale up and produce it. So this includes BiologicalE in Hyderabad, India. They're one of the big vaccine producers, like Serum Institute of India. Biopharma in Indonesia, which is also a big producer, and Immunity Bio, which is led by Patrick Song-Shung from Los Angeles, and he has a vision for using this for capacity building for South Africa. BiologicalE has taken it the furthest, and it's gone through phase 1, phase 2 trials as a recombinant protein vaccine on an alum formulation, together with an oligonucleotide known as CpG, which is an immunostimulant that really helps elevate the levels of virus neutralizing antibody. And that's now gone through phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials. About a month ago or so, the Indian regulators gave the green light to go into phase 3, so it's in phase 3. And now the Indian government has provided an advance purchase for 300 million doses for India. So the hope is that if all the stars align, this will be released for emergency use in India later this summer. And then now BiologicalE is working with CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. This is an organization which is a consortium of the Gates Foundation and the Norwegian government, several other governments the Gavi Alliance, the WHO, to provide some advanced purchase support for vaccines. And they're now involved working with BiologicalE to reproduce what we're doing in India globally. So to support, accelerate development for Africa and other low and middle income countries. And so we're quite excited about that as well. And the reason for this, of course, is if you look at the heat map of who's getting vaccinated across the world, it's pretty much confined to the Northern Hemisphere. It's, it's all the US, Canada, the Nordic countries, Western Europe, the UK, and, quite honestly, that's really about it. The continent of Africa right now is almost completely unvaccinated. Same with same with Latin America, same with many countries in Southeast Asia. And now, for instance, Indonesia is in free fall. It's in this dire crisis, and they don't have access to adequate vaccine that'll produce virus neutralizing antibodies. So the hope is that ours can come through. I think the frustration that I've had around this is, everybody was so focused on innovation early on. In my moments of frustration, I sometimes call it the shiny new toys. We were so focused on innovation that I think nobody was able to take a step back, and say, hey, where's the low cost, durable, easy breezy vaccine that we could scale up for the world now? And that's what we offer. And I think right now, what I think is really needed is for someone to come through for us in terms of saying, well, it's great BiologicalE as an advanced purchase of 300 million doses. They have the capacity maybe for 1 billion. But when you look at the numbers, right, they're daunting. It's more than 1 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa, 650 million people in Latin America, 500 million people across the low-income countries of Southeast Asia. When you add up the numbers, you're talking about 3 billion people, 6 billion doses of vaccine. And where's that going to come from? And I've been a little bit critical of the Biden administration because they really haven't come up with that, been able to articulate that or come up with that plan. What they've said is they'll donate 200 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine this year, 300 million next year. Well, it's not a drop in the bucket, but it's very modest compared to the 6 billion doses that we need. So I've been trying to push the Biden administration to take some ownership of this and just say, look, find a producer, produce the other 5 billion doses that BiologicalE is not producing, because we can't screw around, right? This Delta variant is accelerating. It's already overtaking several African countries. We need this now. We can't start thinking about doing this next year or the year after. And that's kind of where we're at right now, not really making too much progress on that front. So making, some headway in terms of vaccinating India, perhaps Indonesia, perhaps South Africa, but there's still a lot more of the planet that needs to be vaccinated. So why don't I stop there and see how people are thinking and get your thoughts.
Right. That sounds good, Dr. Peter. So thanks a lot for that brief introduction to everything that's happening around the vaccines and how we should be focusing on the important problems. So a quick thing, if the panelists would like to ask questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves and directly talk. Otherwise, if anyone has any questions, please write it down in the chat column, and Dr. Hudson, would pick it up and share it.
I have a quick question. So in terms of, they're in clinical trials now, but have you started to have conversations with the Indian government about distribution?
Well, I think right now, there is some distribution network in place. It's more about now having enough vaccine to go around. I think that's been somewhat problematic. So India historically has been one of the big vaccine producers for the world. So they have 3 or 4 large vaccine manufacturers. For instance, the Serum Institute in Pune has been making a lot of the measles vaccine for Africa, for instance. BiologicalE is another one, and Bharat, also in Hyderabad, we work with. And then they're making their own Covaxin, which is an inactivated virus vaccine. So that they're now advancing towards producing. But the other problem, of course, is that Prime Minister Modi has put an embargo on exporting vaccines. So I think, the whole global plan relied heavily on India producing vaccine for the world and exporting it. So we're going to have to figure out a way to lift that export ban as well, or find manufacturers outside of India. So as good as BiologicalE is, and they are, I mean, and whether or not they'll be able to export our vaccine anytime soon, and provide vaccine to COVAX, that's still and how quickly is still a little bit of an unknown. So we'd like to have some more redundancy in the system.
Have they talked? Good. Sorry.
Yeah, so I just have a quick like logistical question. So normally during these things we leave questions to the end and listen to both speakers, but I understand that you, Professor Hotez, have a pretty tight schedule today. So I wanted to just ask whether you were able to stay for the next talk and do the discussion with everyone, or if you would prefer that we ask questions now, because I have a million questions.
Yeah, better do questions now, because unfortunately I've got to
You've got to run.
off. There's this thing called the Delta variant, apparently, that's screwing things up for a lot of us. And
okay, that's fine. I think in this case we can do the Q&A with you first then,
Okay.
before the next talk. So great. So go ahead, Dr. Hudson. I think you had you were in the middle.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah. What about, I guess, are there sort of, I don't know, this is a question for the whole panel, is like, are there logistical considerations in terms of, for all of the other areas that you mentioned, are you sort of in that same process in terms of, like, in Indonesia, have you started clinical trials in other places, or are you just?
Right now it's India. I mean, remember, because we're not a multinational pharmaceutical company, we were pretty heavily dependent on philanthropy for our support, and we got a little bit of funding from the NIH, specifically for COVID-19. But what we wound up doing is raising philanthropy here in Texas from local Texas foundations, like the Dunn Foundation, the Clayburgh Foundation, Tito's Vodka. They came through for us. They're based in Austin, so if you have a mixed drink cocktail tonight, it should be with Tito's Vodka. And then the JPB Foundation was extremely important to us. So private philanthropy was really critical to getting us to this stage. But it was pretty amazing that that whole first few months of the pandemic, I was spending a lot of time raising funding to do this, which shouldn't have had to be so difficult, unfortunately. But it worked out, and it's one of the good things about being in Texas. We've got a lot of private philanthropy for science, which can fill those gaps if some of the big donors don't come through. And now CEPI is supporting it, which is great. But hopefully we'll be able to make catching up in terms of lost time, and now we have this in phase 3 trial. So hopefully it'll happen soon. And BiologicalE is an extraordinary organization to work with. But again, there's not that well-oiled, vetted plan for producing billions of doses, which is the advantage of our technology, is that there's no upper limit. So for instance, could Merck & Company, which produces lots of hepatitis B vaccine, could they flip that around and produce 4 billion doses of our vaccine? In principle, they could. So it's a matter of trying to get champions to help us with something like that.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about vaccine diplomacy, and maybe tell us a little bit in terms of your latest book. What is the outlook for? I mean, I know Kristen has been doing a lot of predictive models, and the situation is dire in South America and in sub-Saharan Africa. Could you say a little bit more about how urgent that is right now?
Yeah, and I took this on in a big way when I was U.S. Science Envoy in the Obama administration, The part of the problem is I mean, the multinational companies do a lot of important work for providing vaccine for the Gavi Alliance, but it's clear that we're too dependent on the multinationals. So for instance, there's no ability to produce vaccines on the continent of Africa right now. Latin America profoundly underachieves. Brazil does a little bit, Cuba a little bit, and Southeast Asia as well. So what we need is over the long term, is to build capacity for producing vaccines locally. One of the visions that I would have is to create these manufacturing hubs around specific technologies in Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia. It's a long-term process, and it's not just building the factories. That's in some ways the least of it. It's the human capital that's trained in how to scale up production of vaccines, because vaccines are more complex than small molecule drugs, and how you do it under a quality umbrella with quality control and quality assurance, how you have the national regulatory authorities who know how to provide the oversight from that. All of that is lacking, and all of it's probably a 10-year building process in each of the regions. And so and then who's going to pay for it? So we have to start thinking about that now to prepare for the next pandemic, because otherwise we're always going to be faced with this situation. Despite, I think the COVAX sharing facility was brilliant in its conception in terms of sharing vaccines equitably for the world. The problem was the vaccines just weren't there. They were vaccines that could not be scaled up in a rapid way like our vaccines, and so nobody was able to create that portfolio to ensure that we'll have vaccines available. And so I think it's a balanced portfolio. I think the other piece to that is people say, well, is this all going to be mRNA vaccines going down the line? And I say, no, I think we have to keep a balanced portfolio of different technologies. So for instance, if you were to ask me at the start of the pandemic which of the vaccines was going to probably work out for COVID-19, and if you said, well, Ixnay, I'm talking about your vaccine, Peter, what else would you look at? I would have said the Merck vesicular stomatitis virus technology, the VSV technology, which led to the Ebola vaccine, which was, an amazing vaccine and stabilized the continent of Africa. And I would have said, the mRNA technology, well, we've been talking about nucleic acid vaccines for decades and they still haven't panned out. And lo and behold, the VSV technology really tanked for this vaccine, and mRNA took off. So the point is, you can't really predict for any vaccine, for any disease, which vaccine technology is going to be the winner or the game changer. So I think it's a reminder that we have to keep multiple technologies in play: mRNA, VSV, inactivated viruses, recombinant proteins. The more we have, the more shots on goal we have, the higher the likelihood of success.
Yeah, so I have a question that kind of dovetails with that as well. So you mentioned the Biden administration and there is a disconnect. What would be your ask in your ideal world that the Biden administration do to move this forward?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's not like they haven't done anything, right? They are donating some doses. As I said, 200 million of Pfizer, BioNTech this year, 300 million next year. I think 60, 70 million doses of AstraZeneca. And it's great they're doing it, but it fails to reach the scope and magnitude of what we need. And they've done some patent waivers. That's not going to have any immediate impact. Maybe down the line it will. What they need, here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for either the Biden administration or the state or the White House or the State Department to give a speech. And the speech says, look, this is the scope of the problem: 1 billion people in Africa, 650 million people in Latin America, 500 million people in the low income countries of Asia. We have to make 6 billion doses of vaccine. We don't have that right now, and no commitments for that. So I want the U.S. government to say, we're going to take the leadership in producing it. We are now going to work with, some of our big producers, such as Merck or GSK, We are going to work with them to produce 5 billion doses of vaccine by the end of 2021, ones that could be, that we know we can do that scale up, the recombinant protein vaccine, and say, this is, we're going to take the leadership on. It doesn't mean they have to pay for it all. They can work with the other G7 countries, but it's not that expensive. Our vaccine is probably going to come out about $1.50 a dose. It's probably the least expensive of all of them. And so, what's 5 billion doses of vaccine? We're talking about $10 billion, of which some of that would be supported by the Biden administration. So in the scheme of things, that's not a huge amount. And that's what we have to really look. And I want to see that leadership come out of the U.S. government. And then that is always followed by, hey, Dr. Hotez, why is it always the U.S. government that's got to lead that? Why? Because that's life in the big city. That's just the way it is. If the U.S. government doesn't take leadership, things don't seem to get done. And eventually, the other countries will come along. But at least that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, and related to that, we have a question in the chat. So Diana, our other speaker here today, says India is the largest producer of vaccines, yet less than 20% of the population is vaccinated. What do you attribute this to?
Yeah, well, I mean, India is moving forward. I think they are scaling things up now. Things haven't moved as fast as we'd like. And I think there's two problems. In the beginning, I think India struggled with having the supply chain of all the ingredients they needed to make it. And then there was the export ban. So all of the vaccine that they did make had to stay in India. So there was not that situational awareness from the policymakers to say, hey, maybe India is going to struggle with this, and there's going to be an export ban on vaccines from India. So we needed more redundancy in the system.
Great. So I had a quick question, and being mindful of your time as well. So what was the most unusual and unexpected learning that you had over the past year of the pandemic?
I think one of the things is how useful this concept of virus neutralizing antibodies is as a marker for protection. Because we knew T and B cells were important, and they still are, but there is this pretty good association between high levels of virus neutralizing antibody and, at least shortly after immunization, and protective efficacy. I didn't think that one would fall so tightly. I think, I'm surprised how some technologies took off and others didn't. For instance, I never would have thought the mRNA technology would have been as successful as it was. Conversely, I was disappointed by the efficacy of the inactivated virus vaccines. I thought they would, that's another old school vaccine. I thought they would have given better levels of protection than they did. And that's troubling, because we can make also a lot of the CoronaVac and Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccine, but it doesn't look like they're really holding up well against the variants. So that's been a somewhat of a disappointment. Also, some of the side effects of the adenovirus vectored vaccines, I would not have expected that either. I think overall the biggest disappointment, though, and biggest surprise is, we finally realized the depth and breadth of this globalized anti-vaccine empire that is. I mean, I've been talking about it for a long time. That it started out as grassroots groups after the Wakefield paper in 1998. But now, the Center for Countering Digital Hate, that's amazing. We have to have an organization called the Center for Countering Digital Hate, now finds that the 12 leading anti-vaccine groups have 60 million followers on social media. They're monetizing the internet, selling, fake products. That's devastating. Then the adoption of anti-vaccine, anti-science by political extremists on the far right, which has now become mainstream across the GOP. That's been a profound disappointment. All you need to do is turn on Fox News or Newsmax at night, and you're just getting regular anti-vaccine rants. And I mean, I had Laura Ingraham on Fox News together with Governor DeSantis of Florida go after me, the other night, and it's not the first time she's done that. So, targeting scientists, that's a problem. And then the involvement of the Russian government, using anti-vaccine, anti-science messages as what's being termed weaponized health communication to be divisive and to destabilize democracies, and as well as discrediting Western COVID vaccines in favor of Sputnik V. So, facing that anti-science empire, I think, is going to be really formidable and something that has to be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Kristen, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say it because I know we're kind of running out of time, and yeah, if there's any other questions for sure, but I guess I was gonna ask, so we're here at PathCheck, and we have a big Slack full of young people and volunteers and connections amongst universities. How can we collaborate on this? How can we best support your efforts? Because this is obviously of the utmost importance, right? To try to get the world vaccinated and to deal with misinformation.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have always said is, the scientific challenges to make these vaccines they're not trivial, but they're surmountable. The hardest part I've had is I've been doing this now for 40 years since I began as an MD PhD student in New York in the 1980s. Coming up with that sustainable business model for how you get vaccines made for the world's poorest people. I think there's one out there. I just don't have that business background to know how to do it. Coming up with a sustainable business model to make vaccines for the world, to make the vaccines that the big pharma companies won't make. And we've made some progress, going from discovery to clinical trials, and now hopefully this COVID-19 vaccine will be released for emergency use. But even then, we're still struggling to figure out who's going to scale up and make it, for what India is not doing. And that remains a struggle. And then for the disinformation empire, I think, most people still don't buy into my belief that this is a disinformation empire. And when I make the statement, and I wrote this an essay in Nature a few weeks ago, I said, we put a lot of infrastructure in place to combat nuclear proliferation and cyber attacks and global terrorism. And the anti-science empire is every bit as formidable. And though I often say the reason 600,000 Americans died is partly due to the SARS-2 coronavirus, but in equal measure, it's the defiance around masks and social distancing and now vaccines. And this was intentionally done by the disinformation empire. So how do you begin countering that? And what are the levers we have to pull and push? I think is going to be really important to look at.
Well, to your point, I mean, there are geopolitical obstacles and logistical obstacles, but I wonder, is it feasible from sort of the point of how far we've evolved or progressed as a civilization? Do we feel responsible enough for each other to take this moment and establish preparedness procedures for the future? Do we care if all of these countries, implode? I don't think we're there yet. Maybe that's the problem, is depravity.
Yeah, I don't, and I was expecting more on this front from the Biden administration. I mean, they did a good job getting vaccines out to segments of the country, right, to the Northeast, to the West Coast. They could not overcome the disinformation that's blocking vaccination in the South, the part of the country where I am, or in some of the mountain states. So Delta is going to rage through those parts of the country in the coming weeks. And they've not really taken ownership on the global situation with COVID-19. I mean, a lot of it is optics, the patent waivers, the the modest donations. It's helpful, but it's still, I don't even want to say it's a drop in the bucket. That would be unfair either. There are steps, but I would have thought they'd be further along on both combating disinformation and this as well. I mean, the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, is a good guy, right? He's smart. They came out with a document today, an advisory on combating disinformation. But it's very mom and apple pie. I mean, and it might have been written by Mr. Rogers. It just it didn't really have a lot of teeth to it, and really acknowledge the depth and breadth of the problem. So the two commonalities, both with defeating the anti-science and the global COVID situation, is there's not been a frank leveling with the American people on the depth and breadth of the problem. This is what America's willing to do. This is what we need to fill the gaps, and that's what we need.
And to understand that, like, to the previous point, our connectedness is what's at stake here, right? The virus is connecting us. We see that plainly from the infection map, but it's whether or not we decide to feel connected, I suppose. And
yeah, I mean, this is these are both disinformation and not having vaccinated the world are global problems, and we know how quickly things move. If you remember, in the early days of the Trump administration last year, I'm sorry, the early days of the pandemic, 2020, it was all about President Trump saying we're gonna close the border with China, we're gonna do travel restrictions from China. Well, hell, by the time they were already talking about that, the virus had slipped in from Southern Europe into New York City to launch that huge epidemic. And it just shows you how fast moving these epidemics are. So, we don't have good governance mechanisms to work with each other in a more meaningful way.
Well, we thank you so much for the time that you've given us, and I don't want to hold you too much past your commitment, but this has been brilliant, so thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and good luck on your program, and I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to keeping in touch with everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been
Bye-bye.
amazing.
We'll see you later.
Bye.
So let me quickly share my screen.
Diana, what are your time constraints today? Are we okay for you?
I have no constraints and we're totally fine.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. That's sorry, we switched up the format a little bit, but it was an important discussion, I think. So I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely.
So Diana is actually the president and founder of PGI, which is Project Global Impact. It's a nonprofit corporation with the mission of providing an accelerator of ideas that create, develop, and deliver global projects that have a positive impact and lasting tangible effect on the quality of life. She's a certified project management professional who leads an international team of project and program managers on the development of the Rapid Response Pandemic Unit, which she's going to share a little information about today, which is a modular system of testing, laboratory, and vaccination units to combat COVID-19 and future pandemics. So thank you so much for joining us, Diana. You're welcome to share your screen if you'd like.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay. So, well, let me just say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be in the world. And thank you for this opportunity to share with you information about the Rapid Response Pandemic Unit, what we refer to as R2PU, which we consider a community-based solution to COVID-19. The R2PU is a standardized infrastructure. It's a 20-foot shipping container that is modified to specifications that meet medical best practices. As a testing unit, it can be loaded with PPE and deployed in response to COVID-19. It is considered a command center or a contact point in affected communities, and it can be maintained for future pandemic readiness. The R2PU comes in 3 models. The original or the basic model is designed for flexible adaptation to the needs of the community. For instance, it can be used, as I mentioned, as a command center for drive-through and walk-up testing lanes outside of it, and then equipped with PPE and station tents, signage, etc. And it can also be used as an isolation unit and then be equipped or preloaded with gurney and medical oxygen. These units are stainless steel, have stainless steel shelving, waste disposal, under-counter refrigeration, storage, IT equipment, and COVID-compliant workstations. The R2PU lab is designed to be compliant to the requirements of the Basic Safety Level 2 or BSL-2 laboratory, and it is the response to the need for point-of-care test results as we saw the laboratories with increased workload not being able to get the tests out quickly. So the lab is equipped with a biosafety cabinet and hood, portable sink, chroma-deck walls, vinyl flooring, self-closing doors, refrigeration, and freezers adequate for storing and dispensing vaccines, including the cold storage needs of the Pfizer vaccine. Okay, the hybrid is has a versatility of a mobile lab, but it has 2 separate patient compartments, and that makes it suitable for vaccine administration. These units can be used singularly or as components. The R2PU is a community-based solution, but it can also be significant in a global coordination to affect close in time or simultaneous suppression. This might be considered in planning for future pandemics for a more robust global suppression. So I've talked to you a little bit about the unit, and now we're looking at the program, and that my team is primarily program and project managers. We looked at a program for containment strategy. And it would consist of 5 responses, that being test, suppress, control, recover, and readiness. And for each of these stages, we recommend local action, that is, and would assist with this, that is, coordinating and directing and evaluating action at the community level, and also a briefing, and that we can provide advice, direction, and training materials, and communications, that is identifying direct channels that to help with the provision of local materials, educational materials on health and behavior, and also data that would help with decision making. Part of the containment strategy must consider both mitigation and a suppression strategy. And just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the difference between the two, and just to help you to understand why the R2PU is a key component for a real suppression strategy. With mitigation such as stay-at-home orders, mask wearing, social distancing, this is obviously very necessary, but it's costly over time and has apparent economic losses. It's good to use mitigation strategy along with a suppression strategy, but with the R2PU, we can achieve aggressive testing, contact tracing, and vaccination, along with supported isolation to drive prevalence to close to 0, and then restore a vibrant economy. So rapid testing is hugely important. Mobile testing and a vaccination strategy helps the health authorities with mobilizing testing resources, and this can help to suppress outbreaks. The program necessarily must have a robust contact tracing component that ideally would be a combination of both manual approaches and apps. And the apps can be the GPS location data logged with timestamps, location trails, as well as Bluetooth technology. But the real challenge is getting the populace to use the app. So it would be helpful if they had, if the individuals had the ability of redaction of private information. It's helpful if they were given guidance and local support as well as incentives to use the apps. For every positive tested individual, it could require an additional 10 to 25 additional tests as a result of a robust contact tracing effort. The containment strategy would require a communication strategy. This is where we're working really well with our partners at Hood Medicine Initiative. This strategy would require empathy and expression directly to the people in the community about what their fears are or what their hesitancies are. But at the same time, to remind them of the benefits to themselves, their families, neighbors, and communities. In doing that, we can build trust in the community. It's a good idea to utilize community leaders, build relationships with them, and enlist them as validators to get the messages out. The message needs to go out to the general public using social media, mass media, digital communications, or even the R2PU. The exterior of the R2PU can be used as a billboard for messaging. We need to understand the baselines that we're dealing with and the formulas that help us understand what the prevalence levels are. And these formulas can support with validation the need for the R2PUs and the quantities of R2PUs per 100,000 people in any targeted area. It's also helpful in helping us understand the number of contact tracers that we need per 100,000 people in order that we can have the adequate training material and training for the contact tracers, and that they in turn can train on do-it-yourself contact tracing to the individuals that are infected, as well as to the public in general. The lab, as a point of care with PCR equipment, we're able to transmit test results. And with that, it requires integration with the public health data systems and a deep consideration for privacy protocols and compliance with HIPAA. And obviously, this is followed through with contact tracing and exposure notification. We know of supply chain risk, first identified with the PPE situation in the early part of the pandemic, but we also saw that the key components such as test swaps and reagents were an issue, and this can still continue to limit the sample collection and process capacity in many parts of the world. A mitigation for supply chain risks is to use more than one test modality. And a good strategy would be a combination of multiple testing strategies or testing modalities along with vaccines as a single strategy. The mobile units as a pop-up unit has the flexibility for quick test site setups. This must be staffed with local healthcare professionals. This provides for cultural competence and helps to build trust with the people that are taking the tests. And so a little bit about our impact when we are both employing the unit along with the program. For patients, obviously, this means health improvement and a sense of security. Medical staff can operate more efficiently, have a greater focus on patients, and have adequate protection for themselves. The authorities of public health would experience public health improvement, economy recovery, tracking, and better decision making. For businesses with routine testing, they would have stronger or better or safer work environments and business continuity. The R2PU in the community would mean immediate help and increased mitigation and suppression. For nonprofits, it supports their purpose and it's opportunity for collaboration towards the same end and provides additional exposure for the other nonprofits. For a health organization, capacity is improved, and I mentioned the relief of lab backups. And the R2PU is a globally standardized product. And with the World Health Organization, it is conceivable that the R2PU could be used for global coordination and thus be a contributor to global health. A little bit about our team and the associated global network. Our core team is a subset of a team consisting of more than 300 members. This team is, or this organization rather, is comprised of skilled professionals, thought leaders, top 50 thinkers, etc., spanning more than 16 countries with a vast network of more than 300,000 connections around the globe. And as I mentioned, more than half, perhaps about 60% of that organization are experienced and skilled program and project managers. Our team is primarily program and project managers. And we're all, our core team and also the co-founders, we're all in different countries. And as such, we operate as ambassadors in our own countries, as eyes and feet and nose and ears on the ground to effectuate things in our own countries. And we each tend to, based on our specialization, lead different work streams. And this map is indicates our reach, our global reach currently with the core team. Here's what we need still. The R2PU could be smart, incorporating a vaccine management software, privacy preserving software. Perhaps it could be as simple as QR coding on the exterior of the unit. We need help with a scheduling app. We need enhanced data transmission capability. We could use help with contact tracing as far as the program integration, tracking, and mapping of the units and the hotspots. Here are some references that we used. I recently read the white paper produced by PathCheck Foundation and found that my knowledge was expanded on the evaluation and assessment of mobile apps. So we certainly like to look at the possibility of collaboration there. And in closing, I'd just like to say that this program requires a multidisciplinary collaboration across technology, science, project management, healthcare professionals, public health agencies, government sector, private sector, and the world's citizens working together to contain a virus which continues to threaten us all. So let's beat it together. Just want to thank you for this time. to introduce the R2PU to you. We need volunteers, and here's our contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. And my team, we're grateful and thankful and look forward to any input or suggestions, recommendations. We just thank you for this time. And I'll turn it back over to you, Nisi.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Oh, I think we missed a question in the question and answer, but were you going to say something, Kristen?
Yeah, if I could just jump in. Unfortunately, I have a meeting at 12, sadly, because I am so excited about this talk. I'm like listening to it. I'm like, wow, there's so much room for collaboration here. So, I think we have this giant Slack at PathCheck, and a lot of people with technical skills around, apps and exposure notification and privacy preserving and all of this stuff is like stuff that we kind of have in spades, and we actually could use some help project managing. So like it could be kind of a beautiful collaboration in that sense. So I just want to say that I am super stoked about this, and if you don't mind, I'm going to send you a LinkedIn request and have this conversation further. Amazing. Yeah, please join the Slack. There's this channel called Volunteer Opportunities. There are a lot of people with amazing skills there that can help with this stuff. So thank you so much. And I'm very sorry that I have to run. It's unfortunate, but.
Thank you, Christine. That was great news. Bye for now.
Bye, Kristen.
Kristen, sorry.
Right. So definitely, thanks a lot, Diana, for that talk. And I also got to learn a lot. So I had a quick question for you. So with this solution, how do you see we improve for or solve for underprivileged people? Like what would be your key inputs on how we could get this to the underprivileged people, or how we could improve their access to this?
Yeah, I think we have looked at that when we're in the design phase about the versatility of the unit, considering how it would get to really remote areas. And so that looked at it a case by case. We looked at IT equipment and what happens if you don't have internet access and all of those things. So it was designed with the versatility in mind, and understanding that there are areas where it might be more difficult to transport into. So we have a couple of different models, and we have the versatility and in terms of the design to create something that can get the job done. Our going into this project was primarily and foremost in consideration of the underdeveloped countries and the most vulnerable populations. So that's been our focus, and that's pretty much why we thought in developing the program that it needed to be more of a bottom-up approach, more of a community solution, a community-based solution.
Right.
I hope that answers your question.
Yes, definitely. So, and yeah, we at PathCheck have also been working on doing bottom-up solutions, and primarily focusing on giving the ability and information to the citizens so that they could actively participate in the efforts. And thanks for mentioning our white paper in your talk as well. So I'm glad that you found it interesting. So that's
Absolutely
wonderful. And I just had one more quick follow-up question. So now that we're in this pandemic, and unfortunately it's still going on with Delta, Lambda variants, etc. So what do you see as the future for this mobile health unit, or the rapid unit that you have built, your team has built, both in continuing in this pandemic and post the pandemic?
Oh, good question. The R2PU has an add value for the post-pandemic, and because it's community-based, owned and maintained and stored in the community, it can be reawakened during the next epidemic or pandemic, and it can be used in the interim for other purposes, for blood donations, it could be health purposes or it can be educational purposes. So whatever the communal needs are for a mobile unit, the R2PU can stand in for that. So, and going forward in future pandemics, hopefully we all learn, we all grasp the lessons learned, and we go forward in the next pandemic in a more coordinated way. And I mentioned something that it may seem a little ambitious, but it would be a situation where these units are dropped or stored and then deployed almost simultaneously for a more simultaneous or close in time suppression. And so going forward, that might be something that we incorporate into the global plan for a more robust global coordination.
I see. That makes sense. So, right, and definitely as Christian mentioned, please join our channel, and I'll share the link for that as well to the Slack workspace. And I think there are definitely multiple avenues where we could work together, and where both of us could help each other with PathCheck. So that's great.
Thank you, Rohan. Thank you. That is exciting news. That's the most I could hope for out of this conversation today. I have seen what PathCheck is doing and super excited and stoked about the talent there and how we can all work together. So thank you. Glad to hear you say that, and we'll definitely be coming forward to see how we can work together.
Absolutely. So I think if the other panelists, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions, and we can take any other questions on the chat/QA as well.
I just wanted to have you touch on whether it might be feasible to also use the units to collect samples needed for like variant tracking for mutant variants. You know what I mean? Like.
Thank you, Nisi. I would probably more defer to your expertise with regards to that, but I did talk to Dr. Claude Khalil on our team about it as well. So there is research going on right now to ascertain whether the R2PU is suitable for conducting surveillance for variants. And I hope so. That would make us super world-class. That would make this unit a super world-class unit that definitely can be used and scaled up on the global level. So hopefully by the time we chat again, we'll have a little bit more information regarding that.
So I think there's a question in the Q&A, but it doesn't open for me while I'm sharing the screen. Dr. Hudson, do you mind taking that question?
Yeah, I think it was from the previous, I think we might have missed it. It was from the previous Hotez conversation, but I can follow up with that person.
Okay,
yeah.
Sure. Right, that's great. So I guess there are no more questions then thanks a lot, Diana, for spending this time with us. And in fact, thanks a lot to both the speakers, Diana Stansbury and Dr. Peter J. Hotez, who spent their valuable time with us discussing about various aspects of their research product and how we could help move forward. So with that, I'll quickly like to reintroduce all the links to join our Slack workspace. Please visit tiny.cc PathCheck Slack, and for the previous talks, please visit tiny.cc PCF Research Talks. With that, I'd like to invite everyone to our next seminar series happening on July 29th at 11 a.m. EST. We have Serena Chang, an NSF graduate research fellow at Stanford University, who's doing her PhD with Joe Leskovic, and Professor Cecilia Mascolo, who's a professor at the Mobile Systems and Communications Department of Computer Science at the University of Cambridge. So we hope to see you all over there. And till then, thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.